You will recall that last time, if you were here, I had you fill out that little sheet of paper, right? Ranking your preference, sort of which region of the world you would most like to do your group presentation on. So I've sorted all of those and have assigned your presentation groups and dates. So let's start with that today. I have tried to give everyone their first or second choice. That was not always possible, given that some were overwhelmingly more popular than others. But no one ended up with lower than your third choice. And if you weren't here on Wednesday, then I sort of simply assigned you where there was space. Okay, so here's what we got. On the 20th of September, first presentation, on Ovid and the values of the Augustan period in Rome. It's going to be Siderian. You'd raise your hand so that other people in your group know who you are. Yep, Siderian Holsendolf, Corey Christmas, Stephen Caracostas, Larry Carroll, and Sarah Eberly. So you guys are going to be the first group, right? You've still got about a month to do this, though. Second group, on the Dao De Jing and the Warring States period in China. It's going to be Michael Olvera, Zach Price, Barry Kinzervik, Darpan Bandari, and Daisha Alston, who is not here today. She was the one who was sitting right there last time. All right, third presentation on the 18th of October on the Pillars of Islam and the 1001 Nights. Chris Kallenbach, Griffith, that is Catherine Griffith, yes, that's you. Ashlyn Etheridge, Jamal Simpkins, and Casey Ware. On October 30th, talking about rasa theory in the plays of Kalidasa. And don't worry, I will recommend to you sources you can go to look these things up, right? So if you don't know what the Warring States period is in China, I'll tell you what book to look at. If you don't know anything about the Augustan period in Rome, right, I'll recommend some books for you to look at. I expect none of you know what rasa theory is, so we'll recommend some sources for you. So that's going to be Darius Ford, Radiant Williams, Connor, that's Lillian Connor, yes. Caitlin Lyons, and Taylor Phillips, who is still not here. November 13th, oral tradition and the griot or jelly in the Epic of Sunjata. That's going to be A. Williams. What's A. Williams? Is that someone who's still in the class? Yes, Ansley Williams. Yes, sorry. Right, this is the problem with not having quite grasped all of your names just yet. Daisha Anthony, Alex Holloway, Shannon Griffin, and Dana Watson. So you guys can fight about the trap music. And on the 27th of November, our last group, human sacrifice and religious ritual in Aztec and Maya culture. So that's going to be Caitlin Sinderstein, Jordan is Tessa Jordan, yes, Chris Allen, and Jessica Montani. And is there anybody whose name I didn't call? Anybody who's not assigned to a group? Okay, so what you ought to do, right, remember who is in your group. I will keep this sort of up on the console in front of me in case you forget or get confused. It would be a good idea to make contact and exchange information with the other members of your group as soon as possible. Right? 'Cause really, the sooner you start working on this, the better it'll be. I will, as I said, email each group a couple of sources to get you started. So what you are going to be doing here right? You're going to be putting together a 25-minute presentation on your assigned topic. You're going to have to use at least 3 secondary sources and provide a complete bibliography for the project, right? I don't need a bibliography from each person. I just need one bibliography for the group. Now, you are also going to provide a short write-up describing what each member of the group did, right? So give me about a paragraph on each person telling me what their role in the group was, including yourself, what they were responsible for, and whether they actually did it. I want you to rate each member of your group from 1 to 5, 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest, on the following attributes as well. First, responsiveness. When you contacted this person, did they actually respond, right? Did they respond to calls, texts, emails, whatever? Did they show up for meetings on time? Did they come ready to work? Second, collegiality, right? Was this person nice to you, right? Were they pleasant to work with, or did they make things difficult? Did they resolve disputes within the group in an adult fashion? Or did they resort to kicking and screaming? And I also want you to rate each person's intellectual contribution, right? To what extent did each person actually contribute ideas, right? Because some people can be very responsive and will get along with everybody, but will pretty much just do what the others in the group tell them to do, right? So what I want to know is to what extent each person in the group actually contributed ideas that helped shape the project. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, then just a couple of quick guidelines for actually making this good. So when you are in class, how engaged are you typically if your instructor is just reading things off of PowerPoint slides? Yeah, it's pretty dull, right? And you want people to pay attention to what you're saying, right? You want people to actually, get something out of this 25-minute presentation that you actually put some work into. So what you will need to do is try to figure out ways to engage your audience, right? Whether it's through asking questions, through, some kind of quiz, through a game, anything like that, right? Just think about the sorts of things that you do in the kinds of classes that you actually like going to, and try to imitate those techniques, right? That'll keep the group engaged, and it'll help you get a better grade. A good presentation is usually a well-integrated presentation. There's a lot of temptation, because I know we have lots of other things to do and lots of other demands on our time and attention, to just give everybody a part and have them separate, do their own thing, and come back together at the end, right? But with a group project, what happens when you just let everybody go off and do their own thing? Yeah, what if some of the stuff is redundant, right? What if 2 people are covering some of the same ground? What if there are sort of parts that don't fit together, right? People are saying contradictory things. So if you don't actually work together on this, you're going to have an incoherent presentation. That's the point I'm trying to make, right? So you want to meet with your group frequently. You want to get together and go over the material together frequently. You want to make sure that you have run through the presentation together at least a couple of times before you actually get up in front of the class and give it. Right? One, that way you know that it's long enough, right? I have had people come up here and give, a 5-person group, give a 10-minute presentation, right? That's not even half the required time. You want to make sure that what you're doing is long enough. You want to make sure it's not too long as well, right? What you should probably shoot for is a presentation of about 28 minutes to half an hour when you do it in rehearsal. Because when you get up in front of people, you're going to talk faster, right? And it's going to be easier for you to cut, if you have to, than to try to pad it out and just sort of stand up here and talk real slowly, really, really slowly click ahead to a slide, right? It's also probably good at, like, it makes it look good for you if instead of just one person talking about a particular thing, if you all kind of share responsibility for talking about everything. So if you're able to bounce off of one another, that makes you look good, right? That makes it look like you are all familiar with all of the material. And finally, I do want you to take the research portion of this seriously, right? I want you to make sure that the sources that you're using are valid scholarly sources that you get through the library. And if you have any questions about that, or any questions on how to use the library databases, or GilFind or whatever, please feel free to come and talk to me, right? I don't mind helping you with that. I will also say that our reference librarian is really good. His name's John Wilson. You can contact him at john.wilson@gsw.edu. Set up an appointment to meet with him. Tell him what you need, like what you're working on, and he'll help you find stuff that will actually work for you.
Can we use Google Scholar? They have scholar resources.
I would prefer you not, because a lot of the stuff you find on Google Scholar is incomplete, right? Like they'll give you sample portions of a book, but they won't give you the whole thing. So context is often going to be missing. I would also like for you to really learn how to use our library resources. Most of the things that you can find on Google Scholar, you can get through our library anyway, or at least through the library consortium.
And are the assigned texts we have to read, are they in our books, or do we need to go to the library?
Those are all going to be, they're all on the syllabus, they're all in the textbook. Okay, any other questions? Yeah.
If there's something you can't find in the library, could you use like if you have an account for EBSCOhost, could you do that?
Oh, sure, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, you can use interlibrary loan. You can, particularly those of you who are on sort of the farther end out of this, you guys have lots of time to gather sources and can use maybe some of the slightly slower methods, like interlibrary loan, like sort of getting sort of other books in the consortium. Those of you who are on the early end of this, you can also do these things if you start working fast, right? If you get together and start working on this now. And like I said, I will recommend to each group 1 or 2 sources that you should probably be looking at. It would make good starting points. Another thing I will say too is I have actually already posted to George of you, like in the course browser, if you look in the folders for each of the texts that we're reading in the course. Right, so let's go to, say, Epic of Gilgamesh. The first thing in each folder is a bibliography. Right? These are the sources that I consulted before sort of coming in front of you and talking about this. And some of that's in the interest of transparency, right? So you know that I'm not just talking out of my ass. And part of this is as well to sort of to help you find places to go if you want more information. Right, say you decide you're going to write your final paper on Gilgamesh. Well, there is a bibliography that can be a good starting point for you. I have also posted in each of these folders a number of other kind of secondary resources, helpful websites, podcasts, video documentaries that are mostly intended to help you to get a sense of cultural context for the sorts of things that we're reading. Because I know that one of our strongest tendencies is to try to fit things that we read into frameworks that are already familiar to us, right? When we read something like Gilgamesh, which was written a very long time ago in a culture that's very different from ours, we often want to try to see analogs to our own time and our own culture in it. And it's not that those aren't there, but what I really want you to try to do instead is figure out what you can about the values of this culture in this period from each text that we read, right? So we're going to try to look at everything in its proper historical, cultural context. And we're going to not so much rely on sort of the idea of relating things to contemporary life, right? Okay, so any questions about anything? Yes,
Derek.
Derek.
Some days we can work on it in class.
No, we're not going to be working on this. You're going to have to do all of the group presentation stuff out of class. But yeah, so that's why you have to figure out who's in your group. Once again, if you didn't quite catch who was in your group, I've still got the file open up here, so just come talk to me at the end of class, and I'll point you in each other's directions. Okay? All right. Then let's talk about Gilgamesh. Now, speaking of sort of cultural context, the piece of music that I was playing at the beginning of class is the Hurrian Hymn number 6. Now, excuse me a second. Yes. Thank you. Okay, so the piece of music I was playing at the beginning of class is Hurrian Hymn number 6. This is the oldest known piece of music. Right? The oldest known musical notation. It was found in a library of clay tablets in what is now Syria. And it was found with about, there are 13 other pieces along with it, but they were too badly damaged to be interpreted. So this is the only one that could be sort of fully interpreted. So it's played on a harp-like instrument. And I wanted you to hear it to give you some sort of sense of the sort of music that ancient poets and ancient performers would play to accompany recitations of a poem like this one. So at the beginning of most classes, I'm going to be playing a piece of music that is in some way relevant to the cultural context that we're talking about. All right, so how'd this go for you? What'd you think? Why did it make you sleepy?
Like it wasn't loud and brassy. It was kind of.
Oh, I was actually talking about the poem, not the
Oh, well, yeah.
not the music.
I didn't know that was. I thought you were talking about the music one. It made me sleepy. But I mean, it didn't help that I was reading it at 10:30 at night.
Okay, that probably didn't help, yeah.
But I had already read it in high school in 5th grade too.
Okay.
So I knew what to expect.
Okay, how many of you have read this before? Okay, good. That's actually a better percentage of you than I usually get. Okay, so what do you already know then about this poem? What do you already know about the Epic of Gilgamesh? Wow, it made that strong an impression, huh? Yeah, Larry.
From what I remember, like I already knew about Gilgamesh and Enkidu.
Okay,
So I already knew that like they were great equals to each other.
okay. Are they exactly equal to each other?
Not exactly.
Yeah, who is the stronger? Yeah, Gilgamesh is the superior partner here, right?
That's because he cheated.
But then he's also.
There's
mom
a kid in
was
the beer
goddess.
woman.
Yeah. I'm sorry, what was somebody was saying?
His mom was a goddess.
Yes, Gilgamesh is what we would call a demigod. He is part human, part divine, right? The way the actual math works out on this doesn't really make a lot of sense. Yeah, he is 2/3 human, 1/3 divine.
I would read that.
Yeah, it's probably best not to question. But yeah, he is 2/3 human, 1/3 divine, right? So he is mostly mortal, but he has this divine bloodline as well, right? His mother is a goddess, that makes him sort of more than an ordinary mortal, right? He's taller, he's stronger, he's smarter, he's better looking. Now, what about Enkidu? What are Enkidu's origins? Yes, he is from the steppes, right? The grasslands outside the cities. So he is a creature of the wilderness. And what do we know about where Enkidu comes from?
It was a piece of clay pinched off by the gods to be Gilgamesh's equal.
Yeah, he's created as an adult by the gods, right? Created in his current form by the gods to rival Gilgamesh. And yes, he is created to be Gilgamesh's equal. And what is it that first about Enkidu that first draws Gilgamesh's attention?
He was like beasts in the woods.
Yeah, he's breaking the hunter's snares, right? Setting the animals and the traps free. So Enkidu, the wild man, is interfering with the work of civilization. He is interfering with the efforts of frontiersmen on the edge of civilization to hunt animals for food. And so, Gilgamesh, the king, as the representative of civilization, has to neutralize this threat, right? Everything we know about Gilgamesh thus far ties him to his city. If we look at the very beginning of the epic, for example, we go to page 99. He who saw the wellspring, the foundations of the land, who knew the ways, was wise in all things. Gilgamesh, who saw the wellspring, the foundations of the land. He knew the ways, was wise in all things. He it was who inspected holy places everywhere. Full of understanding of it all he gained. He saw what was secret and revealed what was hidden. He brought back tidings from before the flood. From a distant journey came home, weary at peace, engraved all his hardships on a monument of stone. He built the walls of ramparted Uruk, the lustrous treasury of Halodiana. See its upper wall, whose facing gleams like copper. Gaze at the lower course, which nothing will equal. Mount the stone stairway there from days of old. Approach Eanna, the dwelling of Ishtar, which no future king, no human being will equal. Go up, pace out the walls of Uruk. Study the foundation terrace and examine the brickwork. Is not its masonry of kiln-fired brick, and did not 7 masters lay its foundations? 1 square mile of city, 1 square mile of gardens, 1 square mile of clay pits, a half square mile of Ishtar's dwelling. 3.5 square miles is the measure of Uruk. Now, why does it bother telling us about all of this? Like, why does it want us to know this about Gilgamesh? What is Gilgamesh, according to the beginning of the epic, most famous or most important for?
He built the wall there.
Yeah, he built these walls. He built this temple, right? He's a builder. He's a civilizer. The most important thing he did was build these walls to protect this city, this temple within the city. Right? A civilizer, a city builder, is a bringer of order. And a creature running around in the wilderness, breaking hunters' traps, right, that leads to disorder. Now, does Gilgamesh's concept of order as imposed on his city apply to himself? How does he behave within the city and towards his people?
Like a bull in the woods.
Yes, he is the wild bull, the rampaging bull of Uruk, right?
He takes the sons from their fathers for his army, and he takes the women from their mothers.
Yep. For other purposes, right?
Yeah.
Not for the army. Yeah. He uses his superior strength, his superior intelligence, his superior stamina, right, to really kind of lord it over and abuse his people. Yes, he built these walls, but he's also a jerk. He does whatever he wants within those walls. And Enkidu is created to stop him. Enkidu was created to be his equal, the wild equal to the civilized man, in order to stop his depredations, right, in response to the prayers and cries of his people. And yet, when they meet, Gilgamesh proves the stronger, right? Why? What happened to Enkidu?
Getting
They sent,
civilized.
they sent Shamat to steal his energy and to tire him out.
Yeah, tire him out is a good way of putting this, right? Yeah. So when the hunter comes to complain about the wild man, Gilgamesh sends this character who's referred to as Shamhat the harlot. Now, those of you who are familiar with the epic may already be aware of this, but Shamhat is not meant to be a simple prostitute. Shamhat is a priestess of the goddess Ishtar, who is the goddess of war, sexuality, and fertility. And Ishtar's priestesses practiced sacred prostitution. So this is a much more sort of socially important figure than sort of a simple prostitute would be, right? This is someone with actual social rank and power within society. And she sent to deal with Enkidu. If we look on page 104, when Enkidu meets Shamhat, Shamhat loosened her garments, she exposed her loins, he took her charms. She was not bashful, she took his vitality. She tossed aside her clothing and he lay upon her. She treated him, a human, to woman's work. As in his ardor he caressed her, 6 days, 7 nights was Enkidu aroused, flowing into Shamhat. Now, Gilgamesh is not the only one with superhuman stamina. After he had his fill of her delights, he set off towards his beasts. When they saw him, Enkidu, the gazelles shied off. The wild beasts of the steppe shunned his person. Enkidu had spent himself, his body was limp, his knees stood still, while his beasts went away. Enkidu was too slow, he could not run as before, but he had gained reason and expanded his understanding. So what's happened to Enkidu physically in this process?
Becoming more human.
Yeah, he is, because he's referred to as a human, right? A human, is treated to woman's work. But what does that mean for him? Yeah, he's physically weaker now than he used to be, right? He's not as strong as he was, right? His strength came from wildness, came from being a creature of the steppes, came from being one with the beasts. Now that he has actually made contact with other humans, he's not as powerful as he used to be. He's been robbed of that. It's sort of we see the animals running away. Right? Did any of your mothers ever tell you not to touch a baby bird or the mother won't come back for
Oh,
it?
yeah.
Okay, yeah. It doesn't actually work that way. Usually, the reason the mother doesn't come back is because you picked up and moved the baby bird, and now she doesn't know where to find it. But this seems to be sort of like that same kind of old wives' tale principle, right? That Enkidu now has stink of human on him, and so the animals don't want to be around him anymore. The animals that he once lived beside shun him and fear him. But what's the trade-off for this? Is this, for Enkidu, only a loss?
No.
Why not?
Because he gets to go back to civilization and be a human.
Yeah, okay, he's going to get to be a human now, right? He's going to get to live among other humans. And we're told at the end of this passage, right, that this encounter has expanded his understanding. Right, so he might be physically weaker than he was and thus now no longer equal to Gilgamesh, but he's also smarter.
Yeah.
Right, he's more intelligent. This is sort of the beginning of a learning process for Enkidu, a kind of civilizing process. So the process here seems to start with sexual contact. He returned, he sat at the harlot's feet. The harlot gazed upon his face. While he listened to what the harlot was saying, the harlot said to him, to Enkidu, "You are handsome, Enkidu, you have become like a god. Why roam the steppe with wild beasts? Come, let me lead you to ramparted Uruk, to the holy temple abode of Anu and Ishtar, the place of Gilgamesh who is perfect in strength, and so like a wild bull he lords it over the young men." As she was speaking to him, her words found favor. He was yearning for one to know his heart, a friend. Now, do you notice how he has positioned himself in relation to her?
Like he worships her.
Yeah, he sits at her feet, right?
Yeah.
So he's made a gesture of submission to her, right? He's already submitted to the representative of civilization, right? He's already demonstrated himself to be the inferior, the social inferior of the civilized person. He's sort of, admitting that, I guess, about himself. Now, how does the rest of this civilizing process work? If we look at tablet 2, right? So he continues to fool around with Shamhat for apparently quite some time. And what does she end up giving him?
Clothes from her.
Yeah. Page 107, she took off her clothing with one piece she dressed in, right? So, step 1, sexual contact. Step 2, put on some damn pants. Clasping his hand, like a guardian deity, she led him to the shepherds' huts where a sheepfold was. The shepherds crowded around him. They murmured their opinions among themselves. "This fellow, how like Gilgamesh in stature tall, proud as a battlement. No doubt he was born in the steppe, like the force of heaven, mighty as his strength." They set bread before him. They set beer before him. He looked uncertainly, then stared. Enkidu did not know to eat bread, nor had he ever learned to drink beer. The harlot made ready to speak, saying to Enkidu, "Eat the bread, Enkidu, the staff of life. Drink the beer, the custom of the land." Why does it matter whether he eats the bread or drinks the beer?
Because it makes him more human.
Bread and beer are both processed items, you can't find them naturally.
Exactly, yeah. He's being introduced to processed foods here.
Beers.
That would be a beautiful thing. If there was simply a river of beer that flowed through southeastern Iraq, yes, I would go there in a second. But there is not, right? Yeah, beer and bread have to be processed, have to be made, right? Primarily out of grain. So these are ultimately products of agriculture and of human industry. So he has to be given human food. Right. Pay attention to the bread imagery as well, because that's going to be important later on. The bread motif is going to sort of continue here. So it's also important that the people that she brings him to are shepherds. Now we saw in our readings for last week sort of two very different attitudes towards shepherding as a pursuit. It was only sort of barely mentioned in the Enuma Elish, right? There's a portion in which Marduk is referred to as a divine shepherd. We saw as well that Hesiod, the poet who composed the Theogony, his profession is shepherd, right? And the muses mock him because of it. Right? Ha ha, you stupid hick, you country bumpkin, right? The Greeks don't have a lot of respect for shepherds. Shepherds are people who live out on the fringes of civilization, and they're not usually associated in Greek culture with civilized pursuits. However, in most ancient Middle Eastern cultures, shepherd is a formulaic metaphor for king. Right? We see that Gilgamesh is the shepherd of the people, right? This was the people's shepherd, bold, accomplished, and mature. So the shepherd, yes, is a stand-in for a king. And what role does Enkidu fulfill among the shepherds?
He hunted for them.
Yeah, he protects the flocks, right, by killing threatening animals. Right? Lions come after the flocks, and Enkidu's there to drive them off. So this, what used to be for him like a kind of symbiotic relationship with wild animals, becomes antagonistic. Right? Instead, he's defending the sheep and the shepherds, right? This is already sort of foreshadowing his role as protector and friend of the king. And then, once he has eaten the bread and the beer, right, his mood became relaxed, he was singing joyously, he felt lighthearted and his features glowed. He treated his hairy body with water, he anointed himself with oil, turned into a man. Bathing and anointing with oil turns him from beast into man once and for all. Right? Final stage in the civilizing process is a bath. You will see this motif throughout the epic as well. Every time a character takes a bath or washes himself, look for that to indicate some sort of change in state. Right, so for Enkidu here, that's the final movement from beast thing to man thing. Gilgamesh is going to take a whole bunch of baths as well, and these will usually indicate changes in him. So what Gilgamesh and Enkidu have in common at the beginning of the epic is that they are both what we can call liminal figures. Does anybody know what this word means? Anybody familiar with the term liminal? Yeah, Zach.
I think it actually means in between, but it's usually,
Mhm.
it indicates something that's in between, typically the spirit world and the human world.
Yeah, usually when we're talking mythologically anyway, we're talking about things that are kind of in between the human world and the world of the divine or the world of the dead, right? Basically, all it really means, though, is a kind of in-between state. It's a term that comes from anthropology. Anthropologists actually use it to describe either stages in human development where you're not quite one thing and not quite another. Like, for example, like a tween, right? Is not quite a child and not quite a teenager. It's a sort of intermediate stage, right? A teenager is not quite a child, not quite an adult. So these kinds of intermediate states, right? They also use it to describe states within a ritual, right? The purpose of a ritual, at least from an anthropological perspective, is to change the participants in some way, right? The participants in the ritual are not the same at the end of it as they were at the beginning. So even like something like, I know that, if you take communion, even communion in church, right? Now, from a Catholic perspective, the bread and wine actually become the body and blood of Christ, and by the end of the ritual, you have made direct contact with the divine. In most Protestant traditions, the bread and the wine are purely symbolic. At the beginning of the ritual, you are an individual who has come to the church. At the end of the ritual, you are a member of a community that is shared in a meal, right? Now, while the ritual is going on, before your state has actually changed, you are regarded as liminal. So a liminal figure is in between two worlds, right? Not quite one thing, not quite another. Gilgamesh is liminal because he's not quite human and not quite a god, right? Not fully human, not fully divine. Enkidu is liminal because he is neither fully human nor fully animal. Now, as Enkidu loses his liminality, as he becomes more and more human and more civilized, he also loses a good deal of his power, right? And becomes subordinate to the other liminal figure, right? Gilgamesh, who remains liminal for the entirety of Enkidu's lifetime. So liminality in this particular epic seems to imply strength, seems to imply power. Now the word from which we draw this, the Latin word from which we draw this, limen, actually means the threshold of a door. So, do we actually see a door or a threshold in the relationship between Gilgamesh and Enkidu? Is there a literal threshold here that's crossed or that isn't crossed?
I don't know if it's crossed, they fight over it.
Yeah, they actually, when they meet, they fight in a doorway, right? And destroy the doorway. If you look on page 109, Gilgamesh is on his way to a sort of we call it like a first night kind of ritual, right? Where the king is permitted to sleep with a bride before her husband does on the first night of the marriage. Now, the reason why this ritual was common in a lot of ancient cultures had to do with the way people regarded the functions of the king, right? The main thing the king had to do, well, there were two main things he had to do. One, he had to protect the people from invaders. Secondly, he was expected to guarantee the fertility of the people and of the land. And this is one thing that we have to remember about most ancient religions, particularly when their practices look strange to us, is that they were all predominantly fertility religions, right? Their primary purpose was to make the land produce more stuff and to make the people pop out more babies, right? These were the ways your civilization gained competitive advantage. And so you wanted the gods to help you make as many people and grow as many crops as you could. So what Gilgamesh seems to be participating in is some kind of fertility ritual. Enkidu is incensed by this gets in the doorway and stops it, right? Page 109. Enkidu approached him. They met in the public street. Enkidu blocked the door to the wedding with his foot, not allowing Gilgamesh to enter. They grappled each other, holding fast like wrestlers. They shattered the doorpost, the wall shook. Gilgamesh and Enkidu grappled each other, holding fast like wrestlers. They shattered the doorpost, the walls shook. They grappled each other at the door to the wedding. They fought in the street, the public square. It was Gilgamesh who knelt for the pin, his foot on the ground. His fury abated, he turned away. Okay, so who wins here? Yeah, Gilgamesh defeats Enkidu. What are the implications of this fight? What's going to happen as a result of this?
He's not going to use the
Yeah, that's actually important, and we'll come back to that in a second. Yeah, the Gilgamesh didn't finish the ritual. What does he do instead? Yeah. He begins a bromance with Enkidu, right? His mother adopts Enkidu, and they go off and have wacky adventures together. All the while, that fertility ritual that was part of Gilgamesh's responsibilities as king is left incomplete.
Because of Enkidu.
Pardon?
Because of Enkidu.
Because of Enkidu, yeah. Enkidu is the man who stands in the door. In a lot of ways, what he's done is he's wedged himself between Gilgamesh and responsibility. He's wedged himself between Gilgamesh and adulthood. And when they go off on their quest to kill Humbaba, the guardian of the cedar forest, what's Enkidu's role? Yeah, he's the protector. He's there to make sure nothing happens to Gilgamesh. He's going to get between Gilgamesh and anything that tries to hurt him. Right? Gilgamesh goes up onto these high places and sleeps inside a circle of flour, while Enkidu watches the door, right? So in keeping Gilgamesh safe from danger, Enkidu is also preventing Gilgamesh from having to grow up, from having to take responsibility for himself and for his people. Here's somebody else Gilgamesh can pawn these things off onto. Here's somebody else who'll carry the burdens. Now, does the relationship with Gilgamesh actually seem to be good for Enkidu? What does Enkidu get out of it, apart from, okay, he gets to live in the city now and not run around naked with animals?
He gets an equal and a family because he grew up without one. And then
Yeah.
Gilgamesh's mother adopts him.
Yeah, okay, yeah, he's got a best buddy now, and he's got a family. But he was happy before without one, right? What does he lose through civilization and through becoming acquainted with Gilgamesh?
Freedom. His wildness.
Freedom, his wildness, yeah.
He kind of loses a sense of self because he just becomes whatever Gilgamesh needs him to be.
Yeah, he's Gilgamesh's little buddy now, right? He's whatever Gilgamesh needs. He's something onto which Gilgamesh can project. He's also, like, if we look at the exchange with Humbaba, right? They find Humbaba, the guardian of the cedar forest. And by the way, just to indicate to you how not urgent the quest they go on really is for the sake of the people of Uruk, right? Uruk is in what is now southeastern Iraq. The cedar forest that they're going to is in Lebanon. Now, I don't know how good your sense of Middle Eastern geography is, right? But those two places are not close together. Right? Humbaba is no direct threat to Gilgamesh's civilization. Yeah. Well, one, they want the trees to build a temple door. Right? A lasting monument to Gilgamesh's greatness. And they want to be able to boast about the deed. Now, once they're there, right, they catch Humbaba without all of his powers, right? One thing about ancient Middle Eastern gods and monsters in particular, their divine glory was regarded as kind of as removable. They could actually take off their godhood for certain purposes. And this would often leave them vulnerable. There's another myth, it's called the Descent of Ishtar. And Ishtar goes to visit her sister, Ereshkigal, who is the queen of the underworld. And at each of the 7 gates of the underworld, Ishtar is told she has to leave behind a piece of her clothing. Now, the end result of this is like, as she leaves behind each piece of clothing, she gets weaker. And then her jealous sister is able to capture her and hold her prisoner by the time she gets down into the underworld. Now, Gilgamesh and Enkidu catch Humbaba in a similar sort of situation. He only has one of his 7 divine glories on when they get to the forest. So he's comparatively easy to kill and easy to capture. And they reach him on page 121, and Gilgamesh is afraid when he sees him, right? Gilgamesh made ready to speak, saying to Enkidu, "My friend, Humbaba's features have grown more grotesque. We strode up like heroes to vanquish him." Enkidu made ready to speak, saying to Gilgamesh, "Why, my friend, do you raise such unworthy objections? How you pule, you make me ill." Now, where have we seen these exact words before?
Gilgamesh was saying that Enkidu didn't come on the journey.
Yeah, Enkidu didn't want to go on this journey initially, right? Gilgamesh used these same words to shame Enkidu into coming along, right? Don't be a wimp, right? This is going to be fun. And now Enkidu is throwing this back at Gilgamesh. "Now, my friend, this has dragged on long enough. The time has come to pour the copper into the mold. Will you take another hour to blow the bellows, an hour more to let it cool? To launch the flood weapon, to wield the lash? Retreat not a foot, you must not turn back. Let your eyes see all, let your blow strike home." So Enkidu becomes the encourager here. And when Humbaba on the next page begs for his life, right? "Oh, Gilgamesh, spare my life. Let me dwell here for you as your..." Tablet broken. "Say however many trees you..." Require tablet broken. For you I will guard the myrtle wood." Enkidu made ready to speak, saying to Gilgamesh, "My friend, do not listen to what Humbaba says. Do not heed his entreaties. You know the lore of my forest, and you understand..." Oh, that's Enkidu. That's Humbaba again, right? Point being, Enkidu is the one who now insists that Gilgamesh slaughter the guardian of the forest, dismember him, kick his head into a cauldron, pull out all of his entrails, rather than simply accepting his submission and service, right? So what has civilization done to Enkidu?
It's taken like his protective instinct of nature and like kind of fighting him.
Yeah, he's become cruel, right? He's no longer the innocent protector of the animals or innocent protector of the forest. He is just as nasty and vicious as Gilgamesh now was, if not more so. Because Gilgamesh shows signs of potentially hesitating here. Enkidu does not. So civilization seems to be regarded, at least in part, as a corrupting influence. Right. One of the reasons Gilgamesh is such a jerk is because he has a whole city to lord it over, right? With walls protected from invasion, and loyal subjects who have to do whatever the hell he says. Enkidu, having been brought to this city, has now become as bad as Gilgamesh. And is actually sort of feeding some of Gilgamesh's own worst qualities. But when we get back to the goal of this quest, right, the goal of this mission, right, this actually tells us something really, really important about Mesopotamian culture. Now, if we go back to page 111, we go back, we're looking at the other, you speak unworthily how you pule portion. You speak unworthily how you pule, you make me ill. I must set my hand to cutting a cedar tree. I must establish eternal fame. Come, my friend, let's both be off to the foundry. Let them cast axes such as we'll need, right? I must establish eternal fame. Right. Take this down, remember this. This is going to be incredibly important for understanding the second half of the epic. Right. This is Gilgamesh's primary motivation in going after Humbaba. I must establish eternal fame. Now on the next page, when Gilgamesh heard the speech of his counselors, he looked at his friend and laughed. Now then, my friend, do you say the same? I am afraid to die. The implication being, of course, that at least at this moment, Gilgamesh is not afraid to die, right? Fear of death has not yet entered his conceptual apparatus, right? If he's going to die, let it be gloriously. If he's going to die, let it be in pursuit of some goal that will make him famous, that will establish his name. Pardon?
So it sounds very Roman almost.
Yeah, and and I think we'll get into this in more detail next time. But one thing to remember again about most ancient world religions, right? And this goes sort of hand in hand with the basic fertility basis of them. For most of them, by and large, the afterlife really doesn't matter a whole hell of a lot. What is most important is what happens in this world, keeping yourself, your family, your people alive in this world. And if you want any sort of real immortality, it usually comes from leaving behind a legacy, leaving behind a name, right? Whether that legacy is like your actual sort of lineal descendants, or whether it's some great thing that you've built, or some incredible deed that you've done, that's what's most important. That's what matters. In the afterlife, and the Mesopotamian afterlife concept is really a particularly kind of simplistic one, right? We'll see this, I think, on tablet 7, right? Everybody gets the same thing. It doesn't matter if you were a good person or you were a bad person. It doesn't matter if you were pious or irreverent. It doesn't matter if you were a hero or a villain, whatever. Everybody goes to the same place and gets more or less the same stuff. What is important is how people remember you on Earth. That's where immortality comes from for them. That's what really matters. All right, does anybody have any questions about this? Are there any parts of this that you found especially confusing or that I didn't cover, or that you really want, like, that you had a hard time getting a handle on? Yeah, Corey.
His dreams.
Okay.
It kind of confused me. Like, I mean, he had 5 of them, and I read that they had said that, and some of the tablets were broken, so they really didn't know how many dreams he had.
Yeah.
But in each dream, he just saw himself getting like almost killed, and
Yeah.
Enkidu was just kind of like, no, don't worry about it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you're
Yeah,
gonna be
you're good.
safe.
You're fine. Yeah.
So I didn't understand like why.
Okay. And yeah, I think that those dreams really sort of come more out of tradition than they do out of any real narrative purpose. So, a couple of things to note here. One, the material on which this epic draws is incredibly ancient. Right, so the earliest versions of the Gilgamesh tale date from about 2100 BCE. And it's just a series of unconnected Sumerian poems that are about a semi-legendary ancient king called Gilgamesh and his sidekick Enkidu. Right. There's no consistent plot that runs through all these poems. They're different episodes in the life of this king. Now, around 1700 BCE, someone takes and compiles these poems, translates them into the language that we now call Old Babylonian, and assembles them into a coherent storyline. And then, around 1000 BCE, a Babylonian priest by the name of Sinleke-Onini puts together the version that you read in translation today, what's called the Standard Akkadian version, which is the most sort of consciously literary version, right? It's sort of taking what used to be oral tradition and constructing it into something that is consciously literary with a consistent plot and parallelism and allegory and symbolism, right? You know, all of this very consciously. This is the most complete version that we have. Typically what we use the Old Babylonian version for now, there are more copies of that floating about, but they're all broken, they're all incomplete. So we kind of use that often to fill in gaps where the tablets of the Standard Akkadian version are broken. So I think a lot of what we see with those dreams is just sort of this kind of recycling of some of this older Gilgamesh material.
Okay, yeah, because he did it with the exchange with his mother earlier. How he had
Yeah.
the dreams, and then again with Enkidu.
Right. And I think what's important in the dream sequences with Enkidu is, the idea that, like, is more really where they do this. Right? It's always on top of a mountain. And this is a practice that continues in folk religion in the Middle East for centuries. If you were here at the beginning of class, we actually talked a little bit about this. There was a fight among the ancient Israelites over sort of where you were permitted to do sacrifices, right? People were accustomed to having these kinds of high places that were just altars on top of mountains, where if they wanted to eat beef, it had to be sacrificed properly. So they could just, sort of take the cow up to the top of the mountain, do the butchering there, roast it on the altar, the fumes go up to God, and they can eat it. Where the priests wanted everybody to do this in the temple in Jerusalem, which would actually have made it very, very inconvenient to eat meat, right? But the idea was that if you got up on top of a mountain, right, that was where you could make contact with the gods in the sky. Right, so that's one of the reasons you'll tend to see most cultures divide their gods up into sky gods and underworld gods. And if you're trying to talk to the sky gods, typically what you do is build an altar and burn something on it and let that go up to the sky. If you're trying to talk to the gods underground, you dig a pit and you pour something into it. Right, which, makes a kind of, there's a kind of associative logic to it, right? All right, so that's all we have for today. I will have reading questions for you. I forgot to bring them with me this morning, so I'll email them to you this afternoon. Yes. If you have questions about who is in your group, please do come up and just come up and talk to me, and we'll get you sorted out.
Because what you can do is you can see the last name, like the directory, and just search by last name, and then you have whether it's student or male. That's how I got hold of all my it's K-W-A-R-E. I'm I can give you my phone number too. I'm right here. So I answer eventually.
Yes. You are. Okay, and when did you register?
I've seen that.
Okay. All right. Yeah, you hadn't appeared on my list. So here's what we'll have you do. You'll work with the group that's going. There's one group that's 4 people. I see 3 of them back. Yeah, they're back. So her, Kim, you'll work with them. You'll talk to them. They'll help you solve it. Yeah.
I haven't done that. You can load and see. I don't think I've done
Calling us CHRA.